seems to be some sort of veneer of resistance to having that raw experience. And so, I mean, I feel like getting from one state to the other is, there isn't like a technique, but there may be some tricks, or there may be a different way of me looking at things that would be helpful, or...
Well, what that is, of course, is basically our attachment to our interpretations, which supplies the apparent veneer. Of course, we're always experiencing reality all the time because there's nothing else to experience.
Right.
But and the only spiritual problem is these misinterpretations, which spontaneously appear in the mind with regards to this. But of course, our real advantage, our real asset is that reality is always present, so it's always accessible. And the fundamental trick is to go to the energy, to go to the substance of experience. It's like the same way if you're in a movie theater and you want to know what's going on, what would you do? Well, you wouldn't look in the story, you wouldn't look who the hero is, you wouldn't look who the heroine is, you wouldn't look what the plot is, you'd look at the light, the substance of it, the energy of it. And likewise, what reveals reality always with 100% clarity is the substance of experience itself, which is the presence of this astounding radiance, the presence of this miraculous consciousness. And of course, neither the radiance nor the consciousness are actually that. Those are just sort of ways of referring to them. Right. But what it is accessible on that level because, of course, it's present. And so it's a matter of dropping out of the plot, dropping out of the interpretations, the gloss, into the actual substance, the medium that is present.
But we can't do that on an intellectual level.
No, it's useless.
So it's like, even though I'm in that, like I'm thinking about that I should be dropping into some other experience, I can't move there.
Well, if you think you need to drop into some other experience, you're already setting yourself up for confusion, because it's not some other experience; it's this experience. And so, rather than thinking you need to shift anything, just try and be more present with this that is right here, and that will affect the apparent shift, the non-shift shift, just directly, and it shortcuts this whole, carrot on the string thing of I'm in a condition of unreality. I've got to get to some reality, and all of a sudden you have this very complex situation. Whereas the actual situation is very simple. This is present. See it.
Yes, when I'm in that awareness and the other problem doesn't exist, it ceases to exist.
Yeah.
And then if I'm caught in the mind cycle, then nothing will really change that either, because if I'm attacking it with that same intent.
But the trick is that the mind can be attacking it with whatever intent it wants, and it has nothing to do with you. So you can let the mind be spinning its machinations, and meanwhile you sort of sneak out the back door and just come to experience.
Yeah.
And so you don't need to stop the mind from its baroque, craziness.
Yeah.
Just let it carry on, and just undercut it and go to direct experience, because the presence, just simple sensory presence, it's just not elaborate, just the simple fact of experience itself reveals absolute inconceivability, reveals absolute, transcendence intrinsically. And at that point, and in that revelation, the mind is just rendered completely irrelevant. It may or may not be doing its insanity, but it just doesn't matter at that point. Some keywords would be like the texture of experience, the energy, the energetic presence, the flavor of experience, of the actual present experience itself, these kinds of things. just to sort of touch that.
I mean, one thing that I notice is that, often I need contact with other energy in order for me to have an awareness of how I'm actually doing.
Uh-huh.
That left to my own devices, I can just be kind of wound around,
Yeah.
in this sort of small, like a fish in a bowl, just
Sure.
swimming around.
Sure.
And sometimes I don't know until I get in the car and I'm on the freeway and someone cuts me off how I'm actually doing.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, oh God, I'm
Yeah.
angry today. Or, I come here and I find that I'm actually quite affable.
Yeah, sure.
I don't have a good reflective mechanism for being able to sense that about myself.
And that's okay, not to worry. It doesn't really matter. The point is less to be self-assessing and more to just whenever you have the facility, contact direct experience to whatever degree you're able, and just do that whenever you can. And don't. It's not a matter of needing to grade yourself or needing to even assess where you're at. Just if the thought even occurs to you, or if you notice at all that, oh, wait a minute, I don't know where I am, I don't know what's going on. Just again, just come to the texture of experience itself, and cumulatively that does the job, regardless of how mucking up you are lost in your own karma. It's irrelevant. Just come to that. Because there's no solution for karma. There's no solution for delusion. You just bypass it. You just drop it, leave it, and come over here. There's no solution. It can't be solved. It will endlessly proliferate.
So Peter, something I've been playing with is, and this is valuable though, what you're saying. When I can, I try and just kind of go to the wise, to the non-verbal, to the whatever, and I can, and I find myself caught up in something. But what I was noticing this morning is that I would keep circling back around to the particular whatever that was that I was getting caught up with. And then what I've been trying to do is notice when I'm in avoidance a lot. So this was like a state that I didn't really want to be. I didn't like it. And I kind of got that. So then what I tried to do was just kind of lean into it some, like try and be with it rather than skirting it or trying to change it.
Yeah.
Is there value in that?
What was it like for you to do that?
Well, again, there's this little ulterior motive that it seems like when I do that, then things seem to just kind of morph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
First of all, generically, don't view this as problem solving. So in other words, don't view this as, oh, I'm getting caught up in something, let me go to noticing, and then I won't be caught up in it. You will loop back to the getting caught up. Don't worry about that. But it's irrelevant. The point is just to go to noticing.
Right.
In other words, it's not a seesaw. It's not an either or where there's noticing or this.
But I think it's almost like a chime or something. I figured, I notice it when I'm like in angst, so I figured what better time to...
No, absolutely. No, this is great. No, go to noticing. Go to direct experience whenever you can, whenever it occurs, and don't worry about its duration. Don't worry about if you go back into distraction or obsession or something. Just don't worry about it at all, because worrying about it just feeds it. Mm-hmm. Trying to get out of it just feeds it. Mm-hmm. Just let go. Like, oh, there I go again. Mm-hmm. And it's familiar. It's our usual stuff, right? So no surprise there. But the new element is just going to direct experience from time to time, whenever you can, to whatever degree you can. And don't think of it as an antidote to anything else. Just think of it as a side project. It's like, think of it as like you're tunneling out of prison with a spoon. You've managed to secrete a spoon, and every now and then when no one's around you, pull a few forkfuls of mortar out from between the bricks. Yeah. And it has nothing to do with the politics and you're being beat up by your cellmate and the guards are oppressive and the food sucks. It's nothing to do with that. It's not about solving that. And one day the tunnel will be there and you'll be gone. Mm-hmm. So you won't have solved the problems in the jail. You're just leaving them. So it's not about. That wasn't a perfect analogy, but it's kind of fun.
Yeah, no. I figure it's time in. I figure, any time that I can move to that, it's a good thing.
Yes.
It's a cumulative.
Yeah. And don't worry about it. It's not a game. Don't play it off against not being in that state. Just don't worry about it. When you go back into your obsessiveness or whatever, just like, okay, cool, that's fine. That's just, plan B.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can only usually do it for little snippets, and I'll go back in and I'll go.
That's great. That's great. It doesn't matter. It's not about duration. It's not about holding it. In fact, you can't hold it. Trying to hold it will just make you spin out of it that much faster, because you'll concretize it as a thing, which means you'll spin it off as a fantasy. But the overall attitude is be very light and forgiving with your negative states. Be very light and forgiving as much as you can.
Yeah.
With your delusion, with being caught up in stories. So don't see that as this is a problem, I really got to solve it. It's just like, oh, okay, I'm a crazy person, But in the context of being a crazy person, every now and then you can go to direct experience, But actually, even though in a sense being light and forgiving may seem like it's tolerance, but in actual fact it's the most efficient way to slip out of it. Because taking it as an important problem you need to solve is just feeding it. You're putting gasoline on the fire.
I guess that's why I'm thinking that leaning into it is probably
Well, leaning into it can be good depends on exactly what you mean by leaning into it. Mm-hmm. If you mean because that phenomena itself you can also use for noticing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In other words, you can be with it as a texture, depending on exactly what you mean by leaning into it. Mm-hmm. So. And that can be really, yeah, exactly. Not because wanting to get away from it is exactly going deeper into it, which may seem counterintuitive, but that's how it works. Trying to get away from our problems is burrowing us right smack deeper and deeper into the center of it. Whereas letting go, just sort of, this is fun. All of a sudden, everything opens up. Everything gets light. Everything gets more unstuck, and in that unstuckness is more opportunity for noticing, for etc. And you're not feeding these states of mind with self-importance. It's the self-importance that makes it that feeds the stuckness. I really have to get out of this. This is really terrible. But if you can sort of try and cultivate or play with the attitude, I'm a crazy person, aren't I? Which is really true. Who'd have thought?
Yeah, well, it's like I'm such an asshole, I'm such an asshole.
Well, sure, who isn't?
Embrace my assholeness.
And laugh at it. Just like, and no wonder, we look at our history, we're all totally traumatized and damaged goods, and we've been raised in this totally psychotic culture. I mean, it's a miracle we have any sanity whatsoever. So in that context, well, of course we're crazy. Of course I'm nuts. Of course I'm obsessive. Of course I have all these, stupid, unrealistic obsessions. But all of that exists in the context of reality. And reality is not affected by this insanity. The insanity is just a little bubble floating in reality. So it doesn't matter, it's unimportant. Reality is not the opposite of insanity. Realization is not the opposite of insanity. It's just the context within which insanity may exist. So you don't need to solve your neuroses or you don't need to solve your delusion. You just need to see that the delusion is a small thing in a vast actuality, which is beyond it and other than it.
And a delusion would just be a spin, right? It would just be
it's a spinning. It's a little semi-internally consistent vortex of conceptualization that literally is like a little whirlpool or a little bubble, sort of floating around up here or wherever in a vast space of inconceivability, and all the rest of the space has absolutely nothing to do with the mania of the little vortex. So the vortex isn't a problem that needs to be solved. You just need to see the context that exists in, which is why this going to direct experience is so powerful, because direct experience is huge. Direct experience is vast. And these obsessions, these neuroses, are small, they're little. I mean, they seem big when we're swimming around in them and identifying with them, but in actuality, it's not the case. And so the trick is to just have that revealed to us directly by direct seeing, because when you go to reality, that becomes self-evident and is in just a very direct, non-verbal, non-conceptual way.
I mean, it's interesting because I think of being in the bubble, that, and you break the bubble in order to get to reality.
Right.
When in fact the bubble's in reality.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes the bubble's there and sometimes it's
Yeah.
not.
And thinking you need to break the bubble is just more bubble, and you're
Right.
feeding it.
Yeah.
You're actually intensifying it by thinking that. You actually intensify it by wanting to get out of it. And that's the whole trick of just, as much as you can, just let go. Yeah, float. Like, oh, wow, God, I'm really far gone today.
Yeah.
And then, but in that context, there's also the actual presence of reality, and you just touch that, and poof, you're out of the bubble. But holding it as a problem, or thinking you need to get out of it, is just being further in it. It's actually digging further into it because you're giving it self-importance. And actuality has no importance. Insanity has no importance whatsoever. It's imaginary. It's insanity. It's nothing. And in actuality, it's very small. It's very small, and you are vast. So you just need to notice that vastness, which is revealed immediately in direct experience.
Sometimes I have, I'm not able to experience or see the direct experiences. I have so many overlays going on, and I get into a lot of confusion about direct experience and seeing it. And so what I've been doing is just at least I can see the insanity. That's
Sure.
very easy to identify. So I see the insanity, and then I just acknowledge it, and then I just put it aside, and then I just kind of just try to stay in a just keep a distance from it, and then I just try to stay wherever that is.
Okay.
And
And
that seems to be-
where are you when you're
I have
there?
no idea, but it seems to work because I
Okay,
feel
good.
lighter. I feel lighter.
Yeah. If you
But-
don't know where you are, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I have no idea.
That's a good
where it's
symptom.
at. Yeah. But it seems to it seems to be a lighter feeling,
Yeah.
feeling of lightness, as well as there's not this heavy energy that's around me.
Right.
And just kind of encircling. I don't feel that as much
Right.
anymore. And I have to attribute it to the fact that I just have let go of the stuff that's happening over there, all these different subroutines that are going on, and all the overlays that are happening, and I'm just kind of out here just floating, and I don't even know what it is.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's very good. One suggestion I could make is that, in a way, that's a kind of a negative strategy in the sense that you're going to a kind of a neutrality,
Yeah.
which is fine. I mean, this is good. It's a good thing. But what I would suggest is you could take it a little further and go to a positivity, because, and what I mean by positivity, I don't mean in a moral sense or anything. I mean in the sense of be with the way your experience is radiant, well, radiant is not a good word because your experience is dynamically present, like light is shining.
Yeah.
Light shining is not a neutral thing. It's a positive event, like the sun. You look out in the sky and the sun's shining. There's a positivity there. An activity. The sun is this vast system of thermonuclear explosions which is extremely positive. I mean, it's putting out. The sun is putting out big time. And this positivity is real. It's actual. And so, so in the context of, say, the neutrality of space, there is this positivity of the sun shining, of lights being on, of sound coming, and it's a slight thing. So what you're doing, I'd say, is great. I mean, by all means, find a more neutral space, a detached space. But something you might just play with is, in the context of that space, notice how there is also positivity present, and don't try to concretize it too much. Just notice it. Just sort of feel that, oh yeah, there's qualities sort of impinging in that space. There's qualities arising in that space, and just feel that in a very general way.
Yeah, I have done some of that because I noticed that how everything is just so harmoniously happening. Whatever's happening, it's just everything just kind of happening out there.
Yeah.
In a very harmonious way.
Yeah,
and
that's what I'm talking about. The happeningness is a positivity. It's it's happening in an active sense.
Yeah, right.
It's something actually happening, as opposed to sort of some absolute neutrality or stasis or something.
Yeah, I know.
And just feel that in any way, even just vaguely, just intuit it, or just feel the flavor of a dynamism. Just play with it very gently, flirt with it. But what you're doing sounds good. Yeah, it is very subtle.
Yeah, I know a couple weeks ago at the Hillside South Line, you gave a definition of love as being all of this that's happening so harmoniously, and that's love. I resonated with that, and
Good.
just kind of stuck with me.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, but feel how that is. Experience that the aspect of that is a positivity. Because it is a happening, in a dynamic sense, in an active sense.
I mean, like you say, the light and the sound and the touch and all of that.
Yeah. You can't shut it off. It's not like a dark room where all of a sudden everything is stopped. It's on. It's turned on. The motor's running. The lights are shining, and the sound is happening, and gravity's pulling, and sensation is sensing, and all of those things have a liveliness, a presence, a dynamism, an activity, a spontaneity on their own. And just, don't make a big deal out of it. Just feel that it's like it's just a little sizzliness, a little bubbliness, a little liveliness.
It's not quite formed, so we'll see how it goes. But it was around the patterns, the
Right.
pattern flows.
Yes.
And my awareness that
It's a really exciting question. To clear the decks.
So I was looking. What I was aware of was it seems like the patterns are. My awareness comes from what I think is asked backwards, which is it seems like the circumstances then create what I'm experiencing.
Right.
And I suspect that it's the total opposite.
Right.
There's these
Yes.
patterns, and I'm just
Right.
assigning these.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so can you speak to that?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, I mean, what you said is just right. So I'm not sure how I could fill it in more. I mean, it's, again, think of like a movie theater. There's patterns of light on a screen and patterns of sound in the air, which is the fact. Mm-hmm. Really, the only fact. And based on that fact, your imagination supplies event, supplies space, supplies personas, supplies plot, supplies activity, supplies meaningfulness, supplies importance, supplies urgency, supplies emotionality, just on the basis of these patterns of light and sound, which are essentially wholly neutral, except for the dynamism of their presence, right? And this is exactly analogous to what's going on here, of course. Your experience there is just, call them patterns of energy, appearing mysteriously in, let's call it, the space of your consciousness, right? And you have the capacity in your imaginative intelligence to designate these patterns and supply entities in space and time and situations and meaningful exchanges and all these things, but all of that level of event is supplied in your imagination. The only actual event is the apparently patterned energy presence in consciousness. And again, of course, even that patterning is only apparent because when you look closely, it's fractal and infinite, and so it's actually unresolvable. In other words, if you look closely at things, at the patterns, they're too complicated to resolve into anything coherent.
So from my experience, from ass backwards, it looks like, it's like this and this happen.
Right.
Right. And then all of that feels like it impacts me in a certain way, and I'm responding like this.
Right, yeah.
So is there any, I'm looking for tricks, of course. Is there anything, are there any tricks, or it would just be going to as raw?
Yeah.
Go to as raw the energy.
Yeah, when you go to the raw energy, there's nothing there but patterns. Mm-hmm. And at that point, you undercut all the eventfulness, all the meaningfulness.
And all of that.
And all the interpretations.
Past.
And you can try. There's a lot of very specific types of exercises you can try. You can look at your hand. Put your hand next to something. Put your hand next to the coffee cup next to you, and feel how that. No, this is my hand, and that the coffee cup's a coffee cup, and they're very different. They're completely different. One is me, one is not me. One is flesh, one is ceramic. Blah 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 blah. And then you can back up, shift gears, and say no. Their presences of light energy. All there is light, and the hand is no more or less me than the cup is more or less me. There's just light present in consciousness. In the field of vision, say. And in the field of sensation, you may say, oh, it's my hand sensing things. But in actuality, if you just feel just your sense of touch, all that there is a kind of a tingly, a cloud of tingly whatever, right? Sparkliness of various qualities that in no way declares itself to be a hand, and certainly not your hand. Mm-hmm. It's just showing up in consciousness. And consciousness doesn't declare itself to be your consciousness, it's just the soul consciousness, the consciousness that is the experiencer, that is experiencing everything, and nothing whatsoever is outside of that. So again, identifying that as you or not. Did you follow that?
I do. This is fabulous to have on this list because that's kind of a big leap when you're in it.
Yeah, but you can do this very concretely, and you can do it in very small little bite-sized chunks like that. Mm-hmm. Like, take two things that ordinarily you think of as being very different and see the way in which experientially they're actually identical. Just like, you're watching a movie and there's Brad Pitt on the screen and Brad Pitt is leaning against a car. Mm-hmm. But the car is no more or less a person than Brad Pitt is. They're both just patterns of light. And you can switch back and forth between those two modes, which you'll find is very easy to do. And when you do that, you'll notice the way that works. You'll notice the texture of interpretation versus the texture of direct energy presence. And as you train yourself to be able to do that, then you'll be able to develop the facility to go more easily to direct, energy presence, call it.
So then that would be something like I'm seeing this and I would be in it, but then I can just realize that within my field of vision, both of these are within my field of vision. That would be yeah.
And there's no both of these. There's just pattern. There's just one field of vision that is infinitely patterned, and it's arbitrary where you draw the lines. Where like with your hand, you typically would draw a hand-shaped outline, and everything inside that outline is hand, and everything outside is not hand, like say in field of vision. But it's very arbitrary, because in actuality, the hand consists of infinite details of patterning, and next to the hand consists of infinite details, and the border between hand and not hand consists of infinite details. So it's kind of arbitrary to declare on the basis of vision alone that hand and no hand are that different. Of course, the hand is more or less kind of colored similarly, and the background is colored a little differently. But in actual fact, if you look at the coloration that's present in the hand, it's all over the place. I mean, there's no way you could possibly quantify the number of shades of color that are present in your hand, or just in your fingertip. It doesn't. You can take a very small, limited experiment, because it always reveals the same result. And then you'll see the arbitrariness of the decisions that the imagination makes when it determines that this is this and that's that. Or another way to do it is it's slightly more abstract in a sense, but it's also very revelatory. Just feel your body. Say, okay, this is my body. One thing. Then feel, this is my left hand, this is my right hand. Two things. But actually they're my body. One thing. These are my 10 fingers, 10 things. But actually it's two hands, two things. But actually it's a body, one thing. And just feel the way, what it feels like to shift, to make that jump each time in terms of the arbitrariness with which we demarcate subsections of our field of experience as separate things. And there's no limit to it. It's like how many pieces can you slice a pie into? Well, as many as you want if you got a sharp enough knife, right? And this is what we're doing. Our experience is one thing. It's just one pie that's present. Just this field of weirdness, right? This field of just weirdness. It's infinitely patterned and infinitely dynamic and totally unanalyzable and inconceivable. And we are experts at slicing, at deciding how many pieces of pie to slice it. There's the Suzanne piece of pie, there's the table piece of pie, there's the recorder piece of pie, there's the computer piece of pie, there's the cup of chai piece of pie. But these pieces don't actually exist. It's just the pie. It's like you have a pie and you have a pencil and you're drawing lightly on the top where you're going to slice it, but you haven't actually sliced it because there's no knife. There's no knife here. The knife is imaginary. The knife whereby I separate my foot from the carpet is imaginary. I do it in my imagination. In actuality, they're indistinguishable. They're inseparable. Because it's one field of presence. And this is noticeable. This is actually the fact. Or you can do kind of sensory experiments like I recommend on my website.
Can I backtrack for 1 second?
Yeah.
So you just described would that be the limit?
Yeah, very much so. But like the exercise I described on my website of noticing the full field of experience, and you can do it just with one sense, or and then as you get more ambitious, you can incorporate other senses. But just experience, like start with your field of vision, say. It doesn't really matter where you start. Start with your field of vision. Experience it as one thing. It's present. You close your eyes, it disappears all at once. You open your eyes, it appears all at once. It doesn't have pieces. It has infinite patternings within it, right? It's infinitely differentiated, but all the differentiations are just vision. It's not like there's vision and other things present. It's all just vision. It's all just the same thing. Like a painting is all just paint, right? It's one substance that's present. The substance being vision, or call it light, whatever you want to. And you close your eyes, it all disappears. You open your eyes, it all appears, and it's just this one sort of fuzzy-edged ovoid thing. And just feel the wholeness of that. Feel how your field of vision is one thing. It's one entity. And it's the only actual entity that's present in vision. And then shifting from that whole field, you can step down to, okay, now I'm looking at Dean, now I'm looking at a chair, now I'm looking at a cushion. And see how these are subdivisions arbitrarily demarcated within this one actual whole field of vision. And when I make these imaginary demarcations, the field of vision hasn't gone anywhere. It hasn't actually been broken up into pieces. And you can by becoming familiar with your field of vision as a whole, like a TV screen or a movie screen. Think of your field of vision as like a movie screen, and everything you're seeing is the movie that's being projected, let's say. So it's just one thing. It's just this one screen that has all of this elaborate information present in it, but it's one thing, and the information is not actually individual. It's all just like in the TV. You can watch. One character walks across to another. Seinfeld walks across the room and gets in some interaction with some other character, but there's no Seinfeld there. There's no other person there, and the flashes of light that are constituting Seinfeld are no different than the flashes of light that are constituting the background of the supposed room he's walking across and all. So the TV screen is one thing, it's one event, and the imagination breaks it up into, there's people there, there's actions, there's activities, there's spaces, there's environments. We do exactly the same thing. The field of vision is one of the major reasons why we suppose that there is space. The field of vision has no space. When you look at the field of vision, you'll see it has no space at all. Space is an imaginary, conclusion that we draw from the field of vision, just like entities and people and things and directions and so on are conclusions that we draw from the field of vision. But they aren't really there. And we can experience this very directly by becoming more familiar with the fields of our sense fields in their basic form, in their actual present holistic form.
It's interesting that exercise, Peter, that without any light on, there is no thing to see. And then, how we, I notice myself that I create terrain, like I don't have the sense from here, looking there, that there is depth even.
Right.
And yet I automatically have created
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I'm automatically responding to this imagined creation
Yeah.
that I make, which is so, it's just like this.
Yeah. It's spontaneous.
This sort of, 3D mapping,
Yeah.
which is all complete fantasy.
Yeah.
It's not actually based on any experience
Right.
other than something that I have learned somewhere. And it takes an enormous amount of energy for me to maintain that degree of spatiality all the time.
Mm-hmm. And again, there's nothing wrong with all of this exercise, but the point is to notice that you're doing it, and notice that it's not actually inherent. It's not about stopping any of these modes or not doing any of these modes. It's just about seeing these modes as they are and not just assume they're all objectively true and part of reality. So, and this is an important point, because it's not like imagination is bad or interpretation is bad. There's nothing wrong with being able to distinguish between a person and a coffee table. It's just realize that there's no actual person and no actual coffee table, and so see the actual mechanism of that distinction in context.
I notice more these days that if I have something that I'm not sure about, that if I do put my attention on that and look at what's really going on there, that there's this dissolution
Yeah.
to a sort of a basic energy
Yes.
that is sort of familiar, very familiar, and very consistent.
Yeah.
And it's not anything I can put into words,
Yeah.
but where I look and I go, oh, right.
Yeah. And this is the great. This is our great asset, our great advantage spiritually, is that attention reveals reality. You know, when you put your attention on anything, the imaginary constructs become more and more ghostly, and the actuality becomes more and more obvious. And it is familiar because we've always been in it. We are it. It's not something new. It's what the substance of our life has always been. The substance of our being has always been. But again, we've sort of lost it over with all these Baroque imaginations and fantasies, and the extent to which we hold all that to be objectively true is the extent to which we're confused.
Yeah.
But undercutting that by just going to direct experience by attention reveals all these mechanisms, and thereby frees us from being trapped by them. And there's nothing wrong with using them. There's nothing wrong with all of this fantasizing and imagining and all that and differentiating. There's nothing wrong with it at all. But you're trapped by it if it's unconscious. If you're just forced to do it thinking it's true. But if you see what it is, then you're not stuck in it. You're not trapped in it. It's just a mode that is present in you, and you can see it as a magnificent power that you have.
Yeah, I think that it's easier in this thing I was talking about before to do with thoughts. You know, that's the hardest area that I have to be able to do that with.
Yeah.
You know, to be able to like look at that.
Yeah.
You know, because other things are much easier.
Well, textually, thought is one of the most subtle sense fields, which is why it's so elusive. It's hard to pin down. It's easy to lose your bearings in it because it's very evanescent. It's not much there that you can find. Vision is, or let's say, is very explicit. It's very obvious, so it's amenable to analysis. It's amenable to really investigating it. Whereas thought is very slippery because it's so subtle. But ultimately, it will yield to the same modes. And again, you don't,
There's no right way.
Absolutely not. It's all just find whatever works.
Yeah.
And also, this is not something that is serial where you have to assemble the pieces and get them all together. All you need to do is notice reality is successful anywhere, and that will spontaneously, by osmosis, permeate all of your experience. Because the nature of reality is not it's not compartmentalized in actuality. It's holographic, or it's more like holographic, let's say. So any time you have a naked experience of raw experience, that's sufficient right there. It's not like, okay, I've done it here in the field of vision, now I have to do it over here, and now I have to do it over here. No, it's not like that. It's not like defeating an enemy where you have to hunt down each one of their little factions and defeat them all one at a time. It's like, no, if you get it anywhere, it permeates. It spreads by itself into all of its aspects, which makes it much easier.
So Peter, here's a question from the chat room. So how is time imaginary? Is it imaginary?
Time is imaginary when we hold it to be time. The phenomena, the actuality that we think of as time is extremely subtle and bizarre and interesting. It's the fact that all circumstances are completely unstable, completely disappearing, completely changing and morphing, but absolutely. And on the basis of that, we extrapolate this thing called time. But if you look at the way in which this is happening, it's very slippery. It's very hard to pin down. It's very elusive. You can't really. It's not like okay, I know time, and I can go right to it and find it. Yeah, here it is. Now I've got time. See, it's right there. It's not like that, is it? I mean, you go looking for the present moment, and if you don't look too hard, it's self-evident that this is the present moment, and the past is vanishing, and I can remember it, and the future hasn't happened yet, and I can imagine it, and now it's appearing as on an ongoing basis. all of which is abstractions, right? But then you look at the reality and try and see what that actually is, and it starts getting pretty weird. Try and find the present moment. Try and find, how does the past happen? The past turns out to be a fantasy in the present moment. The future turns out to be a fantasy in the present moment. Even the present is a fantasy in the present moment. So that's the sense in which time is imaginary. It's not that the actuality of what we mean by time is imaginary, but what that actuality is can't be found as time or as anything in particular at all. It devolves into weirdness the closer you look at it. It just becomes inconceivably weird. And at that point you can't say if it's time or whatever. In other words, it's not that time isn't real, but time isn't time. Time is actually inconceivable weirdness. But the same statement applies to any quality or condition whatsoever. Space is the same thing. Consciousness is the same thing.
It seems that we can, without the idea of a clock or minutes or hours, anything like that, or year, but it seems that we sort of automatically experience in terms of before, now, after. But, every once in a while I've just sort of played around with that. And even those distinctions can sort of disappear.
Well, they do disappear if you exclude imagination. Everything is always now.
Yeah.
Now is clearly the only thing that can be found. So before is an idea, it's an abstraction that exists now, if at all. After is an abstraction that exists now. So before and after turn out to be aspects of the present moment, which is kind of interesting. Because the fantasy is, no, before is over here and after is over here, and now is like here somewhere, right? But it's not like that, is it? Because when you go looking for, here we are now, try and find before. Where are you going? You have to look now. You can't look anywhere else. There's nowhere else to look. So even if you found it before, it would be an aspect of now. The same with the future and the past. So where are you going to look for the past? You can't look in the past. There is no past to look in. All you can look in is now. So even if you find a past, it just turns out to be an aspect of now, which is self-evidently the case. Because the past is where the present circumstances are disappearing to, which of course is an event that's happening now. It's not happening in the past. The past is being created now, and the future is being actualized now. But both of those are really elaborate abstractions. Why bother to go to a past and a future? Why not just say this now? And why have the present moment going to something when there's nothing there that they're going to that's findable? You can't find the past, so why assume it's there in any sense whatsoever, other than as a fantasy? All you can say is there is this. If you want to call it the present moment, that's fine. And when you try and pin down what it is, how it works, you're screwed. Because you aren't going to find the last word. You aren't going to find the bottom line on that one. Because the closer you look at it, the weirder it reveals itself to be. And ultimately you're just floating in a sea of weirdness and irrationality. But that's actual here, now. So that's not an abstraction. But these pasts and futures and befores and afters are just interpretations of here, now. So why bother with these Baroque, why bother adding on all of these pieces that you have to shoehorn in to make them fit? Just stick with here, now, and all that comes without needing to designate it with all this elaboration. Get rid of the past and the future and you do yourself a favor. Things get a lot simpler. Because they don't exist anyway. They're just fantasies, but you have to cart them around and recreate them and remember them. And we all know memory is an act of fantasy. What you remember is not what happened. It's a fantastic recreation of what you think happened now.
I'm trying to think of what happens when you, probably most people have had the experience of saying I'm going to wake up at 3:30 and just a second before 3:30, my hand goes over and,
Sure.
and tips over the lamp or turns off the alarm.
Or both.
And so to wake up at 3:30 a.m., you're going to wake up now. And
Right.
any time you woke up, you'd be waking up now.
Right. But
So you don't have to-
nevertheless, it can be at 3:30.
If it would be at 3:30.
Apparently.
Yeah. Because there is this miraculous functionality, which again is, of course, undescribable and unfathomable. I mean, all functionality is ultimately undescribable and unfathomable. You know, those kinds of functionalities, you know, or any kind of functionality. I mean, I'm here, I'm moving my hand. How does that happen? It's a miracle.
So Peter, all that there really is there's, if I understand this right, there's radiant patterning,
Sure.
and then there's texture, and the texture is the direct experience of the texture is the direct experience, and so then can you
The radiant patterning is, the texture is the radiant patterning. Radiant patterning is the texture. And then there's imaginary interpretation of that texture / radiant patterning.
imaginary
Interpretation. So there's the texture, which is what, like say, in terms of vision, what you're seeing right now, what you're experiencing right now is your field of vision. And there's the interpretation where you think you're in a room and you think you're seeing me and you think you're seeing the back of the computer and all those other things.
Okay.
And those coexist, but the designations is all basically an imagination. It's a mental activity. It's not actual. The textures and patterns are actual, which is the actual differentiation of your real-time experience as, let's call it sense data, or more broadly, experiential data.
So if I'm having a vision of you, so that is an imaginary interpretation.
Well, you're having a vision, that's true. That the vision is of me is imaginary interpretation.
Because you're just light.
Of course, you're seeing light and you're saying, oh, that light must be Peter.
Okay, so then it's...
So there's two events there. One is the experience of light, which is actual, that's textural,
Right.
and it's patterning inherently.
Okay.
And then you're
What's the pattern?
the
The
shape,
pattern is
shape,
what you
color.
look like.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
All the details is
Okay.
patterning.
Okay.
But those details are present even if you don't call them anything.
Okay.
You know, if you walked into a room blindfolded and all of a sudden you had the blindfold ripped off your eyes, you'd see everything, but it would be a moment, maybe a very brief moment, but still a moment before you say, oh, you know, that's a person, I'm in a room, this is,
Okay.
you know.
Yeah.
But you'd be experiencing the patterning before you had names for it.
Right.
See what I mean? So the names is the imaginary, is the interpretation, which is a secondary layer. It exists it's a mental functioning. But the direct patterning, the direct texture, the direct actual experience of light, in the case of field of vision, or of other energies in the case of other sense experience or mental experience, is direct, raw energy. That's the real experience.
So it's the imaginary interpretations that we throw out the door, and just kind of...
Well, you don't need to throw out the door. You
Just
just
let them be there.
Yeah, you need to see that they exist, and see that real experience exists, and see that they coexist, but separate the one from another. Don't think, oh, I am Peter. No, I'm not Peter. I'm a pattern of light that you are imaginarily calling Peter. And when you notice that leads to a powerful result that is unanticipated. You can't imagine why it would be the case until you do it, go through it.
Well, the imaginary interpretations seem to have some kind of sizzle to them also.
Sure. They have sizzle because they're an exercise of the inherent intelligence, which is actual. They're the interpretations are an actual event. So they have sizzle, they have power. They're just not true in their own terms. They're not true. The narrative they're presenting is not accurate. But it's not holding nothing. It's a real event.
And then there is the experience of recognition, which happens prior to interpretation.
Yeah, sure.
You know.
You mean recognizing direct experience?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, within direct experience, we do recognize things consistently.
Yeah. Well, there's many layers to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a. I'm putting it rather simplistically because in practical terms, it's not really important to dissect it completely, or certainly to try to, deconstruct the mechanism, because there's no way to do that. But just to notice that these phenomena are happening each in their own dimension, let's say. Because the problem is that we lump our fantasy and direct experience as one event. You are Lily. This is a computer. I am Peter. So, but all you do is notice that no, you are an energy presence within my experience, and I can abstract a lot of information about you. But see that those are two events, and then I notice that wow, the energy that's present is a different thing than the abstractions that I'm piling on top of it, and reveals, let's say, hidden aspects of the situation that I might not be aware of if I'm just letting myself be brainwashed by my own narratives.
But we're not putting those narratives, we're not generating those.
No, it's spontaneous.
It's
It happens.
the same field that's doing
Yeah.
everything else.
Of course.
But somehow it just seems to get lighter as you proceed through this process of unfolding.
Because you stop being entangled. You stop being entangled in confusion by confusing interpretations with actuality, and then you get to access actuality, which has vastly more dimensionality than the narrative realm, and so you get to access this vastness, this dimensionality, which is enriching, which is empowering, which is liberating, because the richness of actual experience is infinite. Literally, it's unlimited. You discover that in real experience, there's no such thing as limitation. Limitation is impossibility. It's a fantasy. It can't exist. There's nothing. For limitation to exist, there would have to be something limited for it to be made out of, and there's no such entity, no such building blocks. So since nothing exists but unlimitedness, limited conditions cannot be constructed, cannot be made, because there's nothing around for them to be made of. And you can experience this very directly by experiencing what we're calling raw experience. If you do so directly, you have direct evidence of unlimitedness, because that's what it is. It reveals unlimitedness. It reveals infinity. And so this is the mechanism of liberation. You discover that wow, there's no such thing as limitedness. I am not limited. The world is not limited. Nothing is limited. There's just open-ended infinity forever. Except there's no forever. And you have direct experience of that, and that's very powerful. And it's not actually a change of circumstance, because it's the way things have always been, but we don't notice it because we're hypnotized by our own propaganda, by following our own narratives, interpretations of what is going on.
Yeah, it's sort of like, the attraction rather than promotion thing. It's like, when you see the actuality of what's going on, it's far more attractive, and the more limited reality just sort of disintegrates, as opposed to trying to stop limited disintegration without having that more expansive experience.
Yeah. That's why, exactly, and that's why I always recommend just Don't fight with your limitations. Just bypass them and go to direct experience, and it will seduce you. It will pull you into itself effortlessly. It's much easier strategy than trying to do battle with your confusion. That just is confusing. It's a confusing thing to do. You can't find a place where you can connect and get a good solid right to the jaw. It's like how do you take on confusion? It's confusing. But with reality, with going directly to the real raw experience, you bypass that whole issue. You don't need to deal with the problem of solving confusion. You just go to reality, and just that very simple event does it for you.
When you go to reality, is noticing not limited only to the five senses.
Absolutely.
Genuine noticing could be
anything that is present as experience. And of course, when we look at our experience, it becomes very clear, without too much effort, that the five senses are themselves a very arbitrary demarcation of a vast field, much of it, or let's say most of which, is not confined within these imputed five senses. When you look unbiasedly at the whole field of your experience, it's vast, and includes all sorts of mostly astoundingly subtle qualities, only a very small proportion of which, if that was even demarcatable, is allocated to the five senses or the six senses even. But you can see that directly and experientially. It becomes quite self-evident. And at that point you stop worrying about things like the five senses and all that, because you see they're just it's an arbitrary demarcation. It's not really inherent.
Well, Peter, when you mentioned earlier that there wasn't a space, but really that's really all it is just infinite space, right?
Well, there's the actuality of what space is, which is not actually what we usually mean by physical space. Space is the capacity for, let's call it energy, and there's infinite capacity for energy. But it's not necessarily arranged spatially.
Right. So if you...
I mean, in simplistic terms.
Right, yeah, I understand. So is it valid to feel like, because I have had this experience recently where I feel like I'm just floating in space, but I don't feel like I'm experiencing actuality, but I'm just kind of like floating.
Okay.
It's happening in very quiet moments.
Sure. Well, next time you're in an experience like that, feel yourself floating in space, and then let go of the space and just feel yourself floating. Inconceivably, unanalyzably. Yeah. Just let go of the context of that in space you're floating in, and not be just in non-contextual floating, and just play with that and see what that feels like as an exploration.
It feels like nothingness.
Sure. Yeah. It feels like nothing, but it's not nothing, is it? Because if it was nothing, there wouldn't be anything.
Right.
So it feels like it's like nothingness, but it's not. Mm-hmm. And that's good. That's a good place to go. Because you're exploring subtlety, man. You're leaving behind what's recognizable and designatable, but it's not nothing. When you leave everything behind that you can say anything about, it's not nothing. You haven't erased things. You haven't removed anything. Right? There's always it's something. It's always something. It's never nothing. But it can be inconceivably subtle with regards to the way we're used to thinking.
So here's another question from the chat room. How can we know that being continues to exist after the death of the body?
Well, being is the only fact. And that fact is not dependent on the body, it's the other way around. The body is dependent on that fact. So, and since bodies are outgrowth of being, when bodies cease, being doesn't cease. We know that when we see someone else die, being doesn't cease, just because the body stops. Bodies are outgrowth of being. And bodies are not separated from being. They're outgrowths of being, like your hand is an outgrowth of your body. But the hand, it's not like the hand is a hand over here and the body's a body over here and there's a big gap between them. Just because it's an outgrowth of it doesn't mean it's a separate thing. So the body's an outgrowth of being, but that doesn't mean being has gone anywhere. The body is being, and when the body stops, being is still there. If you chop your hand off, the body's still there. You could say the waking state is an outgrowth of deep consciousness. And when the waking state stops, like so you fall asleep, deep consciousness doesn't stop. And more importantly, when the waking state starts, deep consciousness doesn't stop either. It's just maybe not so noticed because we get distracted by all the present details of the waking light show. Right? But that exists in the context of deep consciousness, which exists in the context of being. So being is the root that all phenomena grow out of, and within which all phenomena exist. And being is not temporal. Being is not dependent upon anything. All things are dependent upon being. So when bodies are come into being or go out of being, being doesn't care, it's not affected. It's like a wave coming up in the ocean or subsiding into the ocean's still the ocean. But, the bottom line is wait and see. Send me an email the day after you die and let me know if I was right or wrong. But all these kinds of theoretical questions are really unimportant because what happens after death is not so interesting. The real interesting question is what's happening right now.
Right.
Because that's a question you can look at. After death is a fantasy. After is a fantasy, and still exist is a fantasy. But this is an actuality right here, and you can look at it because it's available, it's accessible, it's present. So the real interesting question is there being now?
Yeah. I mean, being...
Where's the body now?
Yeah. I mean, being... being is. I mean, it's
being
something.
Is, yeah.
It's interesting on that part of that question. I focused on we know, but we don't know being, and I don't know if being knows being. I mean, know in the ordinary sense.
Yeah, you can't know it analytically. You can't know it descriptively. You can't describe it. You can't analyze it.
You can recognize it.
But you can recognize it. That being is known by being, and that you know it is evidence of the fact that you are being because you know it, right? You know you are, right? I mean, this is incontestable. There is being. And what is it? How do I know this being? Because there's being that recognizes being. Being recognizes itself. And that's not just sophistry or linguistic acrobatics. It's a profound existential, experiential fact that being recognizes itself. Being recognizes being. I am is a very, very strong statement. Or let's say, this is a better statement. There is something, and that I can say that with authority. It's not an assertion. It's not an intellectual idea. Maybe there's something. No. This is, it's self-evident. And by self-evident, I mean that it recognizes that it is. And this is profound. Why don't we have a little break? So online people will be back in about 10 minutes. And
I find the biggest illusion that is just always jumping out in front of me is the idea of solidarity, that things are solid. And of course, that's so deeply ingrained.
sure.
In fact, I was doing a thought experiment the other day. I was sort of looking at the sofa about 3 mornings ago and seeing the little sheen of sparkles, and I was doing a thought experiment with a little child. And I was imagining that probably when I first came onto Earth as a very young child. I was just seeing light. And it occurred to me that probably I jumped up on the sofa at some point and started feeling and touching, and I bet you anything that I had an idea of solidarity before I had language.
Oh, sure.
I bet at some point I had an idea that that chair was a solid thing. I could bump into it and get hurt. And I was projecting solidarity on the universe, the three-dimensional universe, before I had language. Because thinking backwards, reverse engineering from an adult level, you think it's language that's doing it.
No. No, it's experiential.
Which means, incidentally and amusingly enough, probably a dog doesn't have good nature. I imagine that animals have the same problem. And they really have projected a solid world around them with objects which bump into things and eat and get eaten and all that. But unless we're able to get around that solidarity, this idea of a solid universe, I don't see how we can take any further steps.
I think you're adding an extra element in your argument that's coming up to words. The fact of solidity is not a limitation. It's just it's a coincidence of the way patterning seems to work.
Well, what I mean is the argument, you start talking about that and suddenly knock on the...
Yeah, no, look, see, so this does this, and this does this, and this does this, and what can we extrapolate from those facts? Nothing other than the facts themselves, which are ultimately just bare apparitions of patterning. So the truth of solidity is that patterning appears to function within itself the way that it does, which basically says nothing because there's no why there, there's no explanation. And that may sound like, again, we're ducking the question, but on the contrary, the question turns out not to be a question, because solidity as an entity, as a condition, and especially as an imputed limitation, is wholly conceptual. The fact that empirically patterning seems to behave the way it does is a fact, but the fact stops there. The fact has no implications. You see what I mean? I don't know. I'm not putting this very clearly. Did that have any clarity for you?
A three-dimensional universe made out of chunks of stuff. Of course, it includes me. I myself am a solid flesh and bone.
Well, relatively.
DNA declared.
It depends how hard you get poked, I guess.
Yeah, and
you're solid until someone shoots a gun at you.
But all of that is a total abstraction. The whole idea of a solid universe.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So in other words, it is observable. The infant crawls up on the sofa and doesn't fall through it.
Mm-hmm.
That's observable. But you can't. There's no conclusions that are implied by that. All you have is the bare fact that happened. That once.
I guess what I'm trying to say, or what I was thinking about at that time, was that it's very hard to. It's hard to imagine. It's hard to believe that there's anything except a three-dimensional universe if you believe that.
Well, sure, of course.
Ontology. And this is a materialist point of view. The absolute materialist point of view, there's no point talking to them about anything except
right.
the material universe.
Except you have to understand that the material universe is actually an apparition within consciousness, and not the only apparition within consciousness. Where's the material universe go when you go to sleep? Oh, that's not real. This is real. That's not real. Says who? If there were sleep scientists who had sleep machines and measuring the sleep universe, they would say the material universe isn't real because they can't find it because it's not there.
Right. Well, science has taken us to that that challenge to solidarity is not
Well, but science, in fact, is going there now with modern physics, is being forced to include the observer, is being forced to include consciousness into the equation. So events occur as experiences, events occur as events within consciousness, and modern physicists are being dragged kicking and screaming to that threshold because in terms of their measurements it's self-evident. There's no such thing as an objective event, right? There's an event that you experience and an event that I experience, and even if we're looking at the same thing, your experience is not the same as my experience. You're experiencing different photons, blah, 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 blah. So, the material universe is actually long gone, even just with cutting-edge modern materialist, so-called materialist science. They're not materialists anymore. So to be a materialist, you basically have to be a Luddite. You have to be back in the Newtonian world, where things are things. I mean, modern physicists, things aren't things. Things are clouds of probabilities. They're only collapsed into any semblance of thingness when they impact consciousness. Which is very weird, and it sounds pretty darn non-material in the sense of a simple, solid, three-dimensional material universe.
May I take that way back? Because when you were talking about patterns,
Yeah.
I got kind of lost. I could follow you with what experience in there, but when you were saying that the patterns actually have. Do you follow my confusion? I mean, I could take that whole analogy if I moved it into the dream state correlation.
Yeah. What I'm saying about patterns is all you can say about the behavior of apparent patterns is that they seem to behave the way that they do at any given occasion. And if they behave over and over similarly in similar occasions, that's just a coincidence. In other words, that happens, that my hand seems to stop there, the pattern which is my hand, the pattern which is the table, and the pattern which is both of them coming together seems to do that. Mm-hmm. I could do that 1,000,000 times, and each time it's a one-off. Each time it just happened to be the case that that's what happened. But that's all you can really say. And you can extrapolate that maybe on the 1,000,000th and first time it would probably be similar, but you don't know that. And you don't know why that is. Or you can say as empirically it seems to be the case. Maybe one time it'll slip through.
I think I was thinking that was somehow important, and I wasn't quite sure why. I think it's important.
You're indicating an important principle, which is the principle of sort of, it's the same principle by which we form laws. We look at specific occasions and we make generalizations about them, and then we hold the generalizations to be objectively true. And that's a big leap.
I think even experientially, I'm going to have to experiment, but I believe that there is an optical illusion effect that you can see the table. If you're thinking of the table as a solid three-dimensional thing with specific gravity, I bet I can't think that and see sparkles at the same time.
Well, you are thinking that and seeing sparkles, because you're seeing nothing but sparkles. You may not notice them.
Well, I'm not noticing them.
Yeah.
I won't notice them because I've locked
Yeah,
into...
but that's the principle of autosuggestion, which is really the prime mechanism of our spiritual confusion, is that it's a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy that things seem to be the way you expect them to be. Mm-hmm. And this is the whole mechanism of spiritual delusion. We seem to be stuck because we think we are. And because we think we do, by this principle, it seems that we are. We look around and there's plenty of evidence that we are. Because that very expectation blocks us from noticing information to the contrary. We censor it spontaneously and unconsciously. So you see that table is solid, and you censor the sparkles, you censor the wiggles, you censor the dynamism, you censor how it's getting bigger and littler when you move your head around, and you only notice inertness, dullness, stability, Thomas.
Number 10.
Yeah. But it's not that the others aren't there, it's that you have censored them by a more or less active process of unconscious denial.
So it's a belief.
Yeah.
The belief is getting in the way.
Yeah, the belief becomes an autosuggestion, an effective
And if the
autosuggestion.
belief comes in even before language, then how do we deal with these beliefs? What is the most effective way?
Well, this is the same thing we've been talking about. Undercut them by going to direct experience, which is not subject to belief. And direct experience reveals multidimensionality. By multidimensionality, we can define that as being evidence for an arbitrary large number of beliefs. In other words, the direct experience of anything, you can draw as many conclusions from as you want, because that's what I mean by multidimensional. It has all sorts of implications which are not necessarily convergent; they're not necessarily coherent. So you can see that table as insubstantial. You can see that table as floating. You can see that table as light. You can see that table as solid and dense and inert and permanent. You can see it as all these things. And when you see the raw experience of the table, you have all of those potencies, but it's not locked into any one of them. So noticing, going to direct experience is basically to be with experience, not having locked it in as one thing or another. You're with it outside of a belief system, outside of a frame of reference. And it is present, but it's not present as any one thing or another. It's just present as a potentiality upon which you could erect various worldviews. In other words, you could take it as being one way or another way. You can take that table as sparkles, or you can take that table as solid. It's an example of two ways. But in the raw experience, it's neither. Or let's say it's either. Because it hasn't been locked in, it hasn't been dialed into. And raw experience is open-dimensional. When you with the raw experience, what you're actually experiencing right now, you can't say what it is. And it's not that the detail of it isn't present. On the contrary, it's that the detail doesn't cohere into a convincing storyline. There's too much information, and you could draw arbitrarily many storylines based on the raw data, but the raw data isn't functioning on that level of interpretations. It's just the raw sea from which interpretations could be drawn if you were so inclined. You follow?
Oh, yeah.
Even if you're not, directly noticing or directly experiencing the table. Because I've been trying it. I think it's almost impossible to get locked in to solidity.
Yeah.
Because
experience is not solid.
No,
if you notice that.
But
it's not. But in actual fact, it's not. But see, that is the context of noticing, and noticing that becomes self-evident.
Right.
But there's a lot of people who would look at you and listen to that statement and laugh and say, "What are you talking about? Of course it's solid."
Well, I don't
So
know.
that gives proof to the fact that it is possibly locked into solidity if you're not noticing, i.e., if you're only seeing your expectations. Don't underestimate the power of expectation. Expectation is what ruins our lives.
Yeah.
We expect
That's a great bump to
that things are what we think they are, and that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And all of a sudden, we're stuck in this hell that we expect to happen, and it's totally supplied in fantasy. And noticing is the antidote to that, because then you leave that world and you enter the actual world, which is open-ended and doesn't have labels or explanations, or things aren't nicely resolved and coherent, and you can't tell what's going on. And on the basis of that, you cannot draw, unless you fall back into beliefs, fall back into expectations, you cannot draw limiting conclusions. You cannot draw conclusions that you can then use to inflict pain and suffering and stuckness on yourself. Because in raw experience, there's no evidence of stuckness. It just is not. It can't be found. Because in raw experience, everything is open-ended. You can't tell what anything is. And how can you make stuckness out of I don't know. You need to have something that has a little more oomph, a little more solidity to it. You can't find it unless you imagine it, which fortunately or unfortunately is very easy to do.
It's like what I was writing the other day, Peter, that expectation is very subtle too.
Yeah,
Like
it's incredibly
even,
subtle.
Even just our belief that words we speak will be understood by others. Or,
Absolutely.
That the time thing, that we have some sort of idea that we'll go somewhere and that we'll arrive there at a particular time. I mean, it's kind of coats everything that we do.
It's endlessly subtle, which is why the spiritual challenge is as subtle as it is and as challenging as it is. If it was less subtle, it would all just be a matter of, oh, I get it, okay, great. And you'd have possibly a lot more realized people wandering around.
Possibly.
But it's very, very subtle, these mechanisms of confusion. And because it's subtle, it's easy to not notice it's happening. I'm with you. Actual experience is present, but it's indeterminate. It's ultimately indeterminate. The presence of your actual experience does not come with labels or descriptions or operating instructions. Nothing actually says what it is. Imagination supplies all that. So anytime you think you know what anything is to any degree whatsoever, that's a sure symptom that you're imagining something. Because in actuality, you cannot know what anything is. So, which is not to deny the specificity and the detail of the experience. Experience is actually present, infinitely detailed, infinitely precise, infinitely specific, but you still can't tell what anything is conclusively. And that fact is very liberating. Because again, you can't construct stuckness, you can't construct limitation out of I don't know. It just doesn't really work.
I find myself believing that I can't know, even on a very practical level, like at my job, things happen, and now I believe that I don't know why that happened, or why didn't that happen. And I mean, even down to that level now, I'm kind of like extrapolating a lot of the principles and stuff that we're talking about, because it's true even at the apparent level. How can you know, why did that happen? Why did I do that? Or why didn't I do that? Or why did he do that? It still applies, even at the very...
on any level whatsoever it applies.
Whether it happened at all, that can be
Sure,
questionable.
whether there's even an it.
Yeah.
Oh, everything, yeah. But again, and that's good, but and believing that and seeing the truth of that is good, but ultimately you can know it very directly, which is more powerful than believing it. You can see very directly that nothing is resolved. Nothing is resolved, and nothing coheres into specificity. Nothing is resolved into definition where you can say decisively what anything is. And when you see that, that's very powerful, because it's self-verifyingly true. It's not a notion. It's not an idea. It's not something you can consider. It's actually the fact that nothing whatsoever has any coherence in terms of presenting itself as anything that has any definition.
So this is a good place to ask Frank's question. He says on your website you have a video of Nisargadatta, in which he says that if you can even see it once for a moment, your life will be forever changed. So what if you've seen it a few dozen times, but you still feel like a rat on the treadmill?
Yeah, but it's different. It's changed. It's not the same rat on the same treadmill.
Aha. Did you get that, Frank?
Be all you can be.
I just, I got the Jag Mechanical, and I just love the little thing in the front, the woman who wrote the letter.
Oh, isn't that wonderful? Yeah.
Where she's like, I have children who have after-school activities.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
I'm expected to, I think you should print this in the front of your book. It's like there.
It's delightful, yeah.
It's just like, in terms of,
Yeah, hi, Jed. If you're listening, we love you.
but things get very, very tenuous.
Yeah.
They appear to get very tenuous, but in fact they really aren't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what we think of as tenuous conceptually is actually the actual objective condition. What we think of as defined and certain conceptually is actually a fantasy. It can't be found. All that can be found is essentially vagueness. It's not a vagueness of lack of information. There's an inconceivable amount of information and experience, right? But it's not coherent. It doesn't resolve. It doesn't sort itself out into nice, neat packets that have, you can wrap up and say, yeah, this is something. It's like, what do I make out of this? It's just, you can't unless you supply the mechanism of imagination, and then it's easy. And all of a sudden, then you just, through a leap of censorship and denial, you just select arbitrary facts and declare them as coherent, and all of a sudden you have an entity or a condition that you have some certainty is a certain way. But the actual evidence that's present in the experience itself does not lend itself to that without this process of fantastic censorship. And we can see this mechanism happening in real time because it's happening all the time in our consciousness. In your experience, you can see this. You're always experiencing raw data, and the mind effortlessly comes up with interpretations. Oh, it's this. Oh, it's that. And those two modes always coexist. And so it's quite easy to see this in operation because it's always right here to see. It's always in evidence.
Yeah, it's almost like we're bouncing back and forth from one to the other.
Yeah, they can be coming in and out. One can be more or less dominant or the other, or they can sort of coexist, and there's a schizophrenia. I mean, there's all different kinds of modes that they have with each other. It's a dance, it's this funny dance. But they're both always present in one way, and even that's not resolvable because nothing is resolvable. And that isn't a stable relationship that you can get a handle on. You can't get a handle on anything, actually. And if you think you got a handle on something, it's a sure sign you're imagining it. Because it's impossible in reality.
So that interpretive part of the consciousness is really what, it's the warm and fuzzy part, it's the part that makes us feel human and comfortable.
All that. And suffering and in pain, too. Don't leave that out. It also is responsible for that.
But at the moments when, for a brief moment that drops, which is rare, but has happened in my case, it's sort of like you're swimming out really, really deep in the ocean, and you put your face down and you see, the bottom is almost out of sight. Feeling that's scary. And you want that interpretive thing to come back.
Well, this is very typical. We interpret this false sense of certainty as security, we're used to orienting towards that, and it makes us feel safe, kind of like the way a baby feels safe when you wrap it tightly and it's swaddling. With very young children, newborns, you find that when you wrap them up tight, they calm down and they feel safe because it feels like the womb, or they're like this. But you unwrap them, and so their limbs come right around, they get very insecure. And it's a similar kind of a mechanism, So typically we have to acclimatize ourselves to the actual openness of things. It's not surprising for it to provoke fear in the case of those of us who are just beginning to feel our way into that. And we go, oh, wow, wait a minute, what's that? It's too much too soon. I'm going back to my shitty little world. But ultimately, through desensitization, through repeated exposure, we discover that this openness is not threatening. In fact, we discover it's nourishing. We discover it's liberating. We discover its potency of intelligence, of meaningfulness, of lusciousness, of interest, of excitement. It's just in every way, in every imaginable category, it's a superior condition to the condition of smallness and definition that we cocoon ourselves in ignorance. But it may take a while to get that, because at first, again, it's so startling because we're so familiarized with our defined experience, and this undefined experience seems very threatening. But again, ultimately it's not. Ultimately it's where true security and true belongingness can be found. So it's actually a much superior state of affairs in terms of its feeling time.
Well, here's a question for Ellen. So, what is your take on formal sitting meditation? Is it the best way to go deeper and deeper to see the reality? What if one can't sit well?
I don't think sitting in terms of a particular posture is necessarily important. You can explore all these different techniques. The problem with that kind of approach is it tends to sort of get stuck in a formality of certain ways that it has to be performed, or certain goals that you're doing, or certain techniques that you're doing. So you tend to have a conceptual framework of what you're doing and why you're doing it and how you're doing it that you're carrying around with you, which can serve as a subtle impediment to direct experience. But meditation is great, but the point is to examine your experience very closely. And obviously that can be powerfully done in a quiet situation, in an introverted situation, but can also be powerfully done in a noisy, sensory overload situation. You can do it in traffic. You can do it, in any situation. So while meditation is fine, it's not necessary, and it's liable to become an addiction where you think it is necessary, and then, I'm not meditating now, I should be meditating, and all of a sudden you're caught up in this concept of meditation as an activity that has some importance. And it's not essential. It's fine. I'm not saying don't meditate. I'm saying it just doesn't matter. Because in actuality, You're always meditating. Meditation is just a synonym for experience. And so, noticing what experience is, you'll discover you're always in very deep meditation. You know, the subtle trap of all these kinds of spiritual practices is they become formulas that you become addicted to, and you begin to think are essential. And then you play off the formulaic condition against its opposite. You know, if there's meditation and it counts, then there's non-meditation, and meditation's better than not meditating, so you should be meditating, because not meditating isn't as good. And all of that whole gamesmanship is an unnecessary elaboration. It's not true. There's no experience which is intrinsically worse than any other, or better for that matter, than any other experience. So by all means, play with meditation, but play with getting in bar fights, play with reciting poetry, play with doing acrobatics, play with skydiving, play with firing guns. Doesn't matter. They're all modes of experience that will reveal what experience is in very direct ways. And none of them are better intrinsically or worse than any other. And if you think they are, or you think a particular behavior is important, that can become a subtle trap that you just get stuck in. There's lots and lots of people that have devoted their lives to meditation, and all they are is meditators. Meditation is a trick. It's a vehicle to go somewhere, and the point is to get where it's supposed to take you, not to become an expert at the trip. Like a bus is to take you to Chicago. The point is to get to Chicago. The point is not to become an expert at riding buses to Chicago. As the Buddhists say, when you get to the other shore, leave the boat behind. Or go to the other shore, screw the boat, swim. Freeze the water and skate across. Hire a helicopter and just fly over. Have Scotty beam you directly.
People also use the word meditation as though it's a single thing. There are hundreds and hundreds of, from the grossest type of thing to the subtlest, that all would be called meditation.
And anything that we refer to, of course, falls into the same category. You designate an object or an activity in the supposition that there is something that word always applies to, and it's an absurdity. Everything's a one-off. But trying to meditate reveals what it is very quickly, because the first thing you'll notice, not the first thing, but after you've meditated a while, you'll notice it's always different. And that's interesting information right there. It's never the same way twice. And it's never the same way in two consecutive instants. And so right away you discover very quickly, wow, there's no such thing as meditation. Meditation is just this weird tripping and mutable experience, which is just what sitting in the chair watching TV is, or drinking a beer is, or driving in traffic is, so...
It's all the same apparition that's happening in the mind. It's
Yeah.
something different.
Yeah. It's just, experience is always exactly itself. And it always looks different. But it never departs from what it is. It can look like anything. It doesn't matter what it looks like, it matters what it is. And noticing is directing your attention to what experience is, not what it happens to be looking like in the moment.
Well, in that sense, like meditation or certain activities might be better, quote, tricks or strategies. It might also depend on the person,
Yeah.
for...
Any trick is a good strategy if it works. When it works.
Right. I mean, for instance, I've been thinking a lot about, does it matter what I do? Does it matter, especially now my life is sort of changing, I'm retired, but pretty much all my life I have been in service, quote unquote service for someone. And, and I'm getting tempted again to go to do that again, just as an activity, but there's something in the back of my mind that says, well, that might be a good way to become, more part of God, or, like meditation is a way, as a strategy or a way to direct myself, from my small self into the larger reality. So, but it doesn't seem like a good strategy. I mean, I could probably just sit here in this chair for, and
Sure.
be the same.
Yeah, sure. There's lots and lots of tricks, and any trick is a good trick if it's a good trick, if it works.
Yeah.
And a good rule of thumb is the best tricks tend to be surprising, tend to be startling, tend to be going against the grain. So doing something other than what you ordinarily do can be most really good tricks will have a tendency to fall into that category. Not as a law, but just as a rule of thumb. Because if you do what you're used to doing, the familiarity of that can have a numbing effect. Not necessarily, but it can. Whereas if you do something that's new and startling and completely different, that the unsettlingness and the unfamiliarity of that can force you into freshness, into openness, into looking around saying, where am I? What's going on?
I guess we
Which
go
is
to Vegas and start gambling or something.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, it's just something very uncharacteristic. And for a person that goes to Vegas and gambles all the time, for them going and doing service would probably be a great thing. See what I mean? So,
Yeah.
in other words, doing something unexpected or unusual that's not line of least resistance. I mean, and again, this isn't a rule. I mean, by all means, there's no rules, there's no laws. But it's just as a rule of thumb, that can be an interesting way to approach things. Getting out of your comfort zone can be a really productive thing. Whereas if you do something that is already familiar and you already know how to do, it's liable to have a numbing effect, or the familiarity is liable to just sort of increase senses of continuity, which of course are all fantastic, because there is no continuity. And the point is to discover discontinuity. So putting yourself in activities which are explicitly discontinuous with your normal modes, just right off the bat can be, you're already kind of priming the pump for disconnectedness, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
But there's no rules. You can't believe anything that works. Do what works. And if it's not working, make it work. Lie, cheat, and steal.
Start saying kind of like the San Pablo Casino.
What?
That's right.
What?
San Pablo Casino.
No, I
Yeah, right. I don't have to go to
No, I
Vegas.
think she's going to get a Saturday night special and start sticking at people on street corners at midnight. That would be a nice turn of events. Service, schmervis, give me your wallet.
I'll test you guys if I'm winning. Let you know.
You say that using any of these things, meditation or any other technique for the person who uses it, if we begin that with the intent to get something from it, we deaden the impact on it.
Possibly. I mean, even using a technique as a technique, you're already putting possible obstacles in your path. Because the point is to explore reality, and you don't need a technique to get to reality. Reality is right here. And if you're using a technique, then you're actually ignoring reality and going to the technique, which is essentially a fantasy. The fact that it's definable as a technique means you're holding it to be something, which means you're in fantasy. And, going to fantasy is the roundabout way to get to reality.
So that, was that in mind then, as you said, if you find it, when you find out what meditation or any of these practices, what meditation really is, you've got the purpose of it, you've achieved the purpose. What it really is the energy of an abstraction.
What it really is the energy of a non-abstraction. What it really is the energy of what's concrete, which is this.
But the original,
that's what it really is. It's just
the energy of the thing that you were putting in front of yourself, you were using as a...
But that's not what it really is. That's what you're thinking it is when you start.
Right.
When you find what it is, it dissolves. There's no such thing as meditation. There's just this experience. There's no such thing as service. There's just this experience. There's no such thing as being active or being passive. There's just this experience. And all these different ways of spin doctoring it is just layering fantasy on experience to no avail, because experience doesn't go away, and it's not actually modified by this piling on fantasies on top of it. It's like, now I'm meditating. Experience doesn't change. It's still just experience. Now I'm not meditating. So I'm piling these labels on top of something that couldn't give a shit. Experience doesn't care whether you call it meditation or not. It's the same thing. Experience doesn't care whether you call it spiritual or not. It doesn't care whether you call it material or not. It's just this. And the point is to get to this. And if you have to go through these Baroque roundabout means to do so, then by all means do so. But the point is to get to this. And I recommend just, going to this. It's a lot simpler than all of these Baroque, roundabout mazes that you go through to get back to where you started from.
Well, the truth is that if you do them for long enough and find they don't work, you'll have to try something different anyway.
But that's the value of all the spiritual practices. If you do them, sooner or later you discover that they aren't actually an improvement on where you started from. But if you need to do that to discover that, then you've learned something.
Yeah.
You've popped a balloon. I've had this whole balloon that if I meditate and become a spiritual aspirant for 40 years, it's going to get me somewhere. But you do that, and 40 years later you go, well, fuck, here I am, and I'm just right where I started from. That's gold. You've got something, that you've got an actual result. It's like, wow, that's information. You popped the whole balloon of the fantasy of the importance of being a spiritual aspirant or a spiritual practitioner or whatever.
I used to meditate a lot, and in my case, the reason I never meditated is because I lost touch. I became unable to say what meditation was.
Yeah.
I would try to tell somebody, and I tried to tell you a few times years ago, how I meditated, and I realized I misrepresented it every time. Because I really didn't know what I was doing when I meditated. But actually what you just said, real meditation is just experience.
Yeah.
That's really the closest to it, right?
It truly is. Meditation is naked experience. At its best, and at its worst, it's just naked experience. But at its worst, it's naked experience that you're heaping all sorts of interpretations on. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, if you're honest, if you go through that process, if you go through all that constructed meditation and all that interpreted meditation, if you're honest and really self-observant, you'll notice, well, wait a minute, I've been doing this thing, and how am I doing anything other than just sitting here? If I'm saying a mantra, I'm saying the mantra, but there's all sorts of other thoughts going on, and this and that. It's like, it's all pretend. It's all just a gamesmanship. And the basic fact never changed, which is just that, well, here I am, experiencing, as usual. Nothing new there. Never changed, it never got better or worse, it's just this.
Meditation is noticing.
At its best, it's noticing. At its worst, it becomes noticing when you live with it long enough. But anything becomes noticing. I mean, the path to realization is delusion. So delusion takes you to realization, sooner or later. Because you do delusion long enough, and you get pissed off enough, and you say, screw this. This is not getting me anywhere. It's not even fun. So why? There's got to be an alternative.
Peter, I was listening to the last LA talk, and somebody in there was asking about if psychologists can help people. And you indicated in a somewhat positive way that maybe they could. And I'm thinking that how can psychologists or psychiatrists help people who are trying to better their psychological condition or improve their mindset or whatever they want to do? I mean, psychiatrists can't really help, right?
Well, it depends on how you put it. It's ultimately miraculous. Saying psychiatrists can't help people is like saying the piano teachers can't teach people how to play piano. Maybe they can and maybe they can't. But you can't say as a blanket statement that no piano teacher has ever taught a person to play piano. And you can't say as a blanket statement no psychologist has ever helped a person's mental state. But it ultimately gets down to probably the genius of the individual and also the chemistry of the relationship. And I think in psychology that's pretty explicit. And most sort of therapeutic relationships, it's all about how well they click and how creative or inspired or talented the therapist is, and so on and so forth. I mean, I don't know. But there's no reason to suppose it can't work, because how can you know anything can work or not?
So
it's like spiritual. It's like saying working with someone in spiritual issues either can or can't work. It's well, maybe it will, maybe it won't. You can't say it can't work, but you can't say it does work. You can say, well, yeah, maybe it'll work.
So,
how would it work? Miraculously.
Yeah.
Same way, how does a piano teacher teach someone to play piano? Miraculously. You can't say. You can't pin it down. You can't say exactly how. There's just sufficient conditions and functionalities are there that it comes together that way.
So, I mean, everything is miraculous.
Well, of course. Because you can't say how anything works.
Right.
And ultimately everything is just the production and functioning of this, which is certainly inscrutable. There's no way you can say how this works, or what it is, or even if it works. All you can say is this is the way it is, and it can't be said why or how. But it's intrinsic to what this is that is the case.
So, yeah, I sort of, struggle with the idea of seeing a therapist, and actually I am sort of right now, but what was confusing me is generally therapists or counselors sort of posit that they're going to somehow help your mental or your mind, but that's pretty much all they really cause it or see is the mind. And I don't want my mind to get more solidified. I want to blow my mind.
Right. But just because they're claiming to be operating under a certain theory doesn't mean they actually are.
No, that's what I.
It also doesn't mean that that's all that's happening.
No. I mean, obviously, I have a mind. I have thoughts. I have patterns. I have a brain. That's been wired a certain way, and that's what I'm seeking a therapist for. Just like I would get a chiropractor to help me out with my back.
Sure.
And yeah, you're right. It's very mysterious how it works.
Yeah.
It's
and just because it's thought that one thing is going on doesn't mean that either that is what's going on, or B, that not a lot of other things are also going on.
Right. Yeah,
I mean,
I was confused about it. I was thinking, well,
it's like that in spiritual work. You go. Someone goes to see some spiritual teacher and they meditate or they talk, or there's a laying on of hands, or there's Shakti Pat, or there's some rituals or what. But you can't possibly say what's actually happening. Even if you describe it in one set of terms, doesn't mean that either that is what's happening at all, or B, that something else isn't also happening concurrently. Because situations are fundamentally inscrutable. Situations are multidimensional and open-ended, and you can't ever say what's happening, how it's happening, why it's happening, anyway, so you can never say what's going on in any situation. Right. Even if people are saying, oh, this is therapy, I'm a therapist, you're my patient, and we're going to work to deal with your emotional problems. It's like, well, that's the story, but what's really happening? Well, I don't know. And an intelligent, honest therapist will say that. They'll say, well, I'm here to do therapy with you, but I don't know what's going on. I'm just doing my thing, and you're here, and we'll see what happens. Right.
Well, I should say, it's a little expensive, though.
Well, that's...
I could go talk to somebody on a park bench and see what happens.
That's true. You could. And it might be effective.
Right,
exactly. Or go to the casino and talk to the guys at the poker table.
That's right.
Got it.
Two problems, a twofer.
See? So, yeah. And you might strike it,
You'll be paying money instead of having to pay money.
Well, I'll leave the table when you get where you'd be paying a therapist. That would be nice.
Too much fun.
And that's really, this is a very short technique to noticing, is notice that you can't describe what's happening in a situation. You cannot comprehensively say what's going on right here, right now, ever. And just see the truth of that, and where are you? All of a sudden, poof, you're not in your frame of reference anymore. Where are you? You're here, you're in reality. Reality is that which cannot be accurately described. You cannot say what it is. And it's easy to see that you're always there, because it's easy to see that you cannot accurately describe ever, comprehensively, what the fuck is going on, ever, here and now. Sorry for the swearing, I get carried away sometimes. Those of you with delicate sensibilities.
I think the most convincing thing is that you can never resolve anything.
Yeah.
It just, life keeps happening, but you just can't resolve it.
Yeah. Just look and see the naked truth of that. See that's an objectively self-verifying fact. And right away, that's a shortcut to reality. You're in reality. Right there. Just, what's going on? I don't know. And in that instant, where are you? I don't know, but I'm here. If there's a here and a me.
There's a background stays the same. I mean, in a sense it does, because it's always there.
In a sense it does, but is it really a background? All of a sudden you look at that and, I don't know.
Well, something has to be reflecting all this.
Does it?
What's that? I mean, that has to be the background, right?
Maybe. Who knows?
It feels like a background.
Okay, you can say it feels like a background. But can you be certain what it is?
I don't know what it is, but it just feels like there's something there doing all the reflecting,
Okay.
and whatever that is.
Yeah. Well, cool. Yeah. Must be quitting time.
What was that?
It's the alarm.
The alarm, you have an alarm? Oh, okay. All right.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.